phase 2. There's the post-bac kind of, and then came here for all obviously, and then match 2 level, so I'm here for a while.
Okay, thank you. Really quickly, can we just give our M4s a round of applause? Not only, did they take time out of their day to come talk to us, but we also had a really great match rate this year. It was 100%, 11 out of 11 students matched, which is incredible. So, we're really proud of you guys, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So without further ado.
All right. So last year they put together a presentation, basically like post-match debrief, get some national stats together, some stats on the program here, how we did. So this year did pretty much the same survey for the 11 of us, or to everyone who matched or applied. And so we're basically looking at the data from 2022 last year to 2023, and just comparing the two. Obviously, things the last couple of years were very odd with COVID. So it might be interesting to see how this data changes throughout the following few years. So to get started, agenda, we're going to go through the ERAS application components, application timeline, or at least for how it was this year. Overview of the match process, which you guys can, I'm sure, have maybe even looked into already, the way the algorithm works. I just heard someone say something on the. Will I be able to hear anyone who says something on Zoom? I thought I just heard something. Sorry, did anyone on Zoom say something?
No, continue.
All right. So after that, we'll be going over ERAS and NRMP from 2023. That's the national data. Then we'll look at our survey results from this year's applying class, followed by the match list from this year and any MS4 advice, and then open it up to you guys for any questions. So let me go to presentation mode. So the components of the application. There's your standard biographical information, which is a lot of demographics. And then of course, your personal statement, your MSB, which is the letter that you get from your dean. Here at Robert Wood, you can essentially go to any of the 3 deans. For current, I think you guys have 3 deans now. We're back to 3 deans. But you can go to any of the deans to write your MSB letter. It doesn't have to be the one that you have in the college that you were assigned to at orientation. Your CV, which is basically research experiences, the amount of research that you have, work experiences and volunteer experiences, letters of recommendation, and any additional info depending on the program. Each program, or not each program, but a lot of programs have specific parts of the application that apply to them. Some of them have, personal statements that they want specific to them, letters of recommendation that they want specific to them. So we'll go into that a little bit. Then followed by the supplemental ERAS application, which has changed over the past year or so. So the supplemental ERAS application, this year it was kind of to help students narrow down the number of narrow down the number of programs that they consider. I think that was the goal. Whether that's actually going to be how it works for students in the future, I don't think anybody really knows yet. But right now you can pick 30 programs to signal. So that's the supplemental application with a few other things, biographical things, and then also some important things in your life, like whether it's research, volunteer, or work experiences. A little bit more on the 30 programs. It can be any program you want, anywhere in the country. It's basically just to give like a little bit of a nudge to the program and say, even before this application cycle begins, I'm particularly interested in you. And how that plays in the interview process, I don't really know if anybody is able to tell from this previous application cycle. But again, we'll see how it goes for the following years. This is just a little bit of a visual of how orthopedic surgery was unique this year with 30 compared to some of the others. So the application timeline. So the timeline, you can begin this year at least. It's probably going to be something similar for you guys next year. It's usually around the same dates. But you can begin submitting applications September 1st. A month later, residencies can start looking at your applications. And November 15th, that's called the Universal Interview Invite Day. It's not every program in orthopedics, it's a lot of the programs, but I'd probably say something around like half, I don't know if you guys would agree, but maybe half participate in Universal Invite Day. The remaining half will trickle in over the following weeks. Then you have your interview season that'll go from the end of November through early February about, I'd say it's probably as late as they go. Followed by your rank list, which goes in March 1st. And then, of course, the 13th and 17th this year was whether you match. So you find out if you match the Monday, and then the Friday, if you hopefully successfully matched, you'll find out where you'll be on the Friday. So again, the match process, I don't want to spend too much time discussing it today. There's a couple really good videos online if you're particularly interested in how it actually works. But at the end of the day, what most people, and also in my opinion, I think will agree on is it's really to your guys' benefit. So you make the rank list based on what you want. You don't have to think too much on like, oh, like, does this program like me back as much as I like them? I think the idea is, and I think the process does a good job of doing it, or somewhat good job of doing it, is, being for your benefit and really making the match list based on what you're interested in. So our ERAS and NRMP data from 2023. So compared to last year, there's 218 programs in the country compared to last year's 210. That's good for applicants. Number of positions has gone up 24 spots to 899 this year. Of course, orthopedics is one of the more competitive fields, and it's not unusual for there to be 0 unfilled spots. I think there's been 0 unfilled spots for the last few application cycles. And the number of spots filled by US senior MDs this year is 76.8% compared to last year's 80.57. This is a good slide. It shows the change in number of applicants to orthopedics over last year compared to this year. So this year we had 1,666. That's down 61 applicants from last year. If you look across the board, it looks like there's actually less applicants compared to last year. And also this year there were less, each student who was applying to orthopedics applied to fewer programs. I think it's really hard to say what this is a result of. It could be related to, the changes with COVID. But, who really knows? Over the past few years, ortho has been steadily increasing in number of applicants. The match rate has been steadily decreasing. But last year was particularly competitive, and this year is back on the track of becoming more competitive, but just a little bit down from last year. Last year, we really saw high numbers of applicants, pretty similar to this year, but as you can see, it went down a little bit. Average number of apps this year was 77 compared to last year's 83, compared to last year's 86. Average number of apps per program. So how many apps is each program receiving? 642, and 506 of those are MD applicants. The number of NRMP participants, so this might be a little bit confusing. Number of ERAS applicants on the left, that's everyone who applies. Number of NRMP participants, that's essentially the number of people who get interview invites and are able to submit a match list. So if somebody applies and didn't get any interviews, that's why the numbers aren't the same. But the total went down 45 from last year, and the number of US senior MDs went down 139. This year it was 947 US MDs. Anybody have any questions on that? This kind of looks at percentages a little bit more. So for ERAS percentages, 2021, it was 56% of ERAS, of people who applied through ERAS successfully matched. Last year, 2022, the number went down to 50%. This year, it was at 53%. So this is what I mean, like when I was mentioning before, how, the successful match rate has been kind of decreasing. Last year was a particularly low year. So like, let's say 2021, it's 56%, 57%. In 2020, it was, I think, in like the 60 range. But now it's getting back on the track of still getting more competitive, unfortunately. But again, just not the same numbers as last year. And the same trend for NRMP. The number of applicants who participated in the NRMP match, same trend for those who were successfully matched. And this year for RWJMS MS4s, we have 80% if we include some of the reapplicants who also dual applied and are now participating in the prelim positions. But 11 of like everyone who applied for the first time, fortunately, are successfully matched, which is honestly fantastic for the school. And again, like just very high numbers compared to last year compared to this year. So we're like going in a nice trend. Hopefully this data that we have from last year compared to this year will help us like keep going in that general direction. So I sent out this survey to everyone who participated in the application cycle this year. Of the 14 people who applied, I got 10 responses. All 10 of those responses were individuals who matched into ortho. So I know STEP is certainly changing. I know step 1 might not be very meaningful for you guys. But in my, like, it just seems like in general, the step 1 and step 2 scores didn't change particularly very much last year compared to this year. Everything in the next few slides that you guys see in these red boxes, it's, you know, left side is what it is, of course. The column in the middle, that's the score or whatever it is that we're looking at for individuals who successfully matched. The right side is for the average for individuals who did not match. So, I mean, Robert Wood students last year and this year are pretty much on par for the means for the national data for STEP scores. And also for the timing to take step 2, it seemed like most people did either end of 3rd year or 4th year just prior to ERAS submission. That was the same for last year and this year. Also, this data is a little bit, it's going to be more meaningful as the years, as we move forward, because if we look at, or any of us who took research years, or if we look at last year's data, everyone was essentially COVID pass-fail, which of course is going to be different for you guys. So we didn't have tiered grades is basically what that means. But for any of the traditional track students, anyone basically this year, anyone who didn't take a research year, we still have some of the data. So 4 honors for 3 students, 5, 6, or 7 honors is 1 student each. Last year's data, like I said, is a little bit more difficult to say because everyone in the traditional track last year who applied and didn't take a research year, they were all COVID pass-fail. So, and then for AOA Honor Society, you can see the percentage last year and this year was a little bit different. But this year was right around the mean for AOA members last year. Also, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand and I'll call in. So ERAS experiences, this is basically work, volunteer, and research. So these, again, we have in the red box is the data from last year. They haven't produced the data for this year yet. But work experiences is right around par for the national average last year and this year's Robert Wood applicants. For the mean number of volunteer experiences, maybe a little bit lower. Nationally last year, average was about 8.9. We were more looking at like 5 or 6 experiences total. And you know, if basically, I'm sure you guys will have access to this presentation, but something to take away from the presentation, in my opinion, is, you know, if you're looking at the means, it's 8.9 nationally, and you look at the applicant pool from Robert Wood this year, our average was 5. You know, don't let it rattle your cage if you're a little bit off. Like, you know, it'll, it's not, you're not going to be ruled out by programs based on that. I don't think. I'm not like in an admissions committee, but everyone did great this year, and the average was 5 compared to 8.9. The mean number of research experiences, we delineated a little bit because, of course, it might be different for students who took research years versus those who didn't. But again, we're pretty much close to like the same as the national data would suggest. So 2022 last year, 6.5 was the average compared to the national data of 66.6. And then with a research year last year was a little bit higher, 9.7. And this year, the research experiences were a little bit lower compared to the national average. How that changed maybe or maybe not because of COVID, it's hard to say. We can make more sense of it maybe once we actually get the 2023 national data. I know there was some interest in knowing what Robert Wood, like this year's applicants published or had abstract wise. But this is basically what everything looks like. So published manuscripts in the 5.8 or 4.5 range, poster presentations in a similar range, and then podium presentations. You can see some of the research year students may have had a little bit more podium presentation experience than some of those who didn't. But as you can see, like if you're having a productive medical school career in research, you can have pretty strong numbers without a research year. So, whether or not, I know people are interested in hearing about whether to take a research year or not, but it's a very, very individualized decision, which I'm sure you hear about a lot.
Hey Brian, what's the difference between research experiences and then numbers of abstracts?
Yeah, so the two don't line up. Research experiences are basically what the positions. It's not really described particularly thoroughly. It's some people really inflate the numbers, others don't. But I interpreted it as how many positions you had. So like, for example, my research year, I described as one research experience. I had basic science and clinical. So that was actually 2 research experience. And then my Robert Wood research experience, I did as another. That's obviously totally different than the published manuscripts, poster presentations, and podium presentations. Do you see like the difference? So that's the difference between experiences and presentations or manuscript publications.
What are podium presentations?
Podium presentations are basically, so manuscripts, you work with a team, you write the manuscript, and it gets accepted to be published in a journal. That's what you look up on PubMed. Poster and podium presentations, those are when you either have finished a project or have the data for a project that you can write an abstract on. Very, very brief abstract, and you submit those to national conferences or international conferences, and you can get accepted for either poster presentations or a podium presentation. And so whether you go to that conference or not, you can give a podium presentation. Podium presentation, you stand up in front of a group, literally a podium, and you present your data, field questions. Poster presentation, they usually have like poster rooms sometimes where everyone's lined up with their poster, with the abstract on the poster, and then people go around and talk to you and field questions in that way. So they're a little bit different. Yeah.
Are those research experiences only ortho, or do they include everything?
This includes everything. There's no delineation of, so if an applicant in ortho wanted to put something they did in general surgery, they could, and it would still contribute to those numbers. Yeah.
How do submitted other manuscript posters, podium, or anything that let's say even if it got acceptance at conference that hasn't happened, how does that stuff tie in your application?
If it's accepted, most people, I would assume, still would put it into their application.
And
Yeah.
what about like a manuscript submitted but not?
That can go into,
Do
you guys remember?
There's like a drop down for all this stuff other than public.
Just for anyone on the Zoom, in case you didn't hear. So if you submit a paper that hasn't been accepted yet, it's being in the process of being reviewed. You can still put it on your application, but there's a drop down whether it was accepted. I think there's like accepted with revisions or being reviewed, but essentially it still goes on your application if it's been submitted.
Hey, I actually have a follow-up question on the research presentation and podiums. If you weren't the one who presented the research, but you were part of that project, are you like, can you still put it down as it was presented, or is that only if you personally presented?
Yeah, so the question was, if you are involved in a project that was accepted for a podium or poster presentation, but you aren't the actual individual on the team giving the presentation, does it still go on your application? It still goes on your application. It's, it's, even if you're not the one giving the presentation, it's great because it's a great way to practice, speaking in front of your colleagues. Great to go to these conferences and, meet people, great for networking. But it's still a big accomplishment if you were on the team and it was accepted for something. So still good to put.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. So OA rotations and letters of rec. Last year was different, of course, because everyone could only do one away rotation. So it was essentially one for everyone. The average was very, very close to one. This year, the mean number of away rotations was 2.65. The number of letter of recommendations from RWJMS faculty, so basically from the experience from your home sub-I, that was last year was 4. We expect that to be higher than this year because last year they also spent a little bit more time than we did this year because they only had one away rotation. So I think it's reasonable to assume they would have a higher mean for number of letters of rec. So 4 compared to this year's 2.5. Letters of rec received from non-RWJMS faculty. That could be letters of rec from your research year. If you did a research year, that could be from an away rotation and maybe like any sort of research that you've done in the past. So I know some of you maybe have done ortho research in between your first and second year, and you might be able to get a letter of recommendation from that individual. So that's what I mean by non-RWJMS faculty. Last year was 1.1 compared to this year's 1.6. Again, you would expect it to be a little bit higher this year because we had more experiences in the away rotation category. Number of dual applicants this year was 1 compared to last year's 0. The mean number of applications that we sent out this year was lower than last year. Number of interviews offers was lower this year compared to last year. Again, that's perhaps a result of sending fewer applications. Again, the number of, as we saw on that previous slide, the number of applications that was sent out per applicant in the entire country last year was higher than it was this year. So that's not necessarily a particular representative, like a specific thing about Robert Wood Johnson's applicants. The number of interviews attended was 10.8 this year compared to last year's 14.1, and the number of programs ranked on NRMP was 11.4 this year compared to last year's 14. I know there was some interest in signaling versus invitations to interview, but this year the mean number of interviews offered from programs that you did not signal was 2.2. Last year, 44% of applicants, or at least individuals who completed the survey, went to their number 1, 22% went to number 2. This year, 50% went to number 1, 20% went to number 2. And this question in this year's survey was a little bit differently, or phrased a little bit different, but for this year, for individuals who are going to a program that they did an away rotation at, that's 60%. So that's a pretty significant number compared to last year's 44%. Whether they did that in-person rotation at home here at RWJ or at their one away rotation. So in hindsight, this is a difficult question to answer because you never really know. But last year, this is only this year's data. But most of us apparently felt that we've applied to the just right number of programs, and similarly, the number of interviews that we attended. This is all those red boxes were basically screenshots from this. This is data from last year, not this year. And if you're interested in this, also, it's a pretty nice plot. But at the end of the day, you know, everyone's going to say, like, what's the magic number to match? What's the magic number to match? At the end of the day, you only need one to match, right? But it just increases, it helps you out the more interviews you get. But if you look at this graph, 90%, your probability of matching is 90% if you have about 13 interviews. But, you know, up and down the curve you can go. Yeah.
Data about the outcomes, were those matched or who did match?
In this like last few slides,
Yeah.
that's from Robert Wood's data, and the 10 surveyors or 10 individuals who completed the survey all matched.
The person who had 4.
Matched into ortho. Yep. So here's our match list and MS4 advice. I think there's 6 of us all here, but a nice spread of programs. Really cool that everyone is, or RWJMS is like very strongly represented here. But you know, we had a pretty fortunate year. It was a nice spread of programs. And hopefully that trend can continue for the coming years. This is a spread at like a bunch of resources. I'm sure you guys are going to hear a lot of these names over and over again. But one of the big ones, especially for away rotations, a lot of people want to know how to be a successful away rotator. I think, I don't know if you guys would all agree, but it seems to be like the most common thing you get asked about is anatomy, or at least in the OR. And I think a lot of people would agree that maybe Netter's Concise Orthopedic Anatomy is like the best book for orthopedic anatomy review. Hoppenfeld is great for surgical exposures because it tells you the critical anatomy that you avoid or you just do not cut. And that's a lot of times the questions that you're going to get asked by your attendings or residents. Ortho Bullets is obviously like fantastic. A lot of times Ortho Bullets also has these links at the, like, let's say you look something up like mid-shaft femur fracture. If you go all the way to the bottom, it'll give you a link to a page that'll describe the approach, and that'll also describe the critical anatomy. Ortho Access, Fumetti, Handbook of Fractures is a great one for trauma. It's very dense and intimidating, but use it as you need. And Pocket Pimped is a good one. It's basically just bullet points of questions that you might get asked and the answers. Mentorship, as you apply, mentors can of course come from anywhere. I think everyone would agree. You can get them, get great advice from, of course, our attendings and residents here at Robert Wood, from your away rotations, attendings or residents, and of course alumni. I think a lot of us, like, we've kind of fielded the current M4 class. Everybody's more than happy to help answer any questions that you guys might have. I understand. I think we'll be sending out like numbers and email addresses to help in any way. So yeah, and as I mentioned, those conferences that you guys might be going on, great way to meet people and hopefully gain some mentors who will give you pretty much invaluable information. This is a very dense or very ugly slide, but it's basically your general sub-I tips that we can, review as a panel. But we can bring it back up when the time comes. Away rotations, a lot about picking your away rotations. It's all about what's important to you, of course, whether it's location, whether it's program size, whether it's, prestige, whether it's being close to home. A lot of things play into it. It's gonna be different for everybody. No one answer is gonna be the same. A thing I actually never thought about, people always talk about, like literally until I made this presentation, but people talk about unlocking geographic locations by doing an away rotation. You don't really unlock it, I guess, unless you get the letter of recommendation, because if you don't get the letter of recommendation from that program, no program has any idea that you did the away rotation there, which I never thought about, but good thing to keep in the back of your heads. Let's see. I don't know if I would say you will be asked why you chose your away rotations, but in an interview, but they might ask you. But in my opinion, and I think based on the feedback in the survey, everyone would suggest trying to diversify the types of programs that you apply to. Whether, again, program size, location, reputation, blue versus white collar. Letters of recommendation. So there are 2 letter types. You have your classic narrative, which you basically, the attending physician that you ask to write your letter basically writes a nice page on you, and it's just like a free form, few paragraphs. Compared to your standardized ESLOR, that's basically a standardized letter, and it's an evaluation of what the attending thinks of you and what the program kind of thinks of you too. Some programs actually require it from each of your letter writers. So I think it's a good approach. We can discuss it later too, but as the panel, but it might be a good idea to ask each of your attending physicians or each of your letter writers to do both. But we can discuss that later. Let's see. Everyone always says, do I want to go for, a physician who is going to be known by many people, or the one who might not be as well known, but is like knows me a lot better? We can discuss it. In my opinion, I think it might be better to go with the individual who knows you better, because if it's just from someone who has a big name that might be well known, that's great. But if they're not really to like discuss you as a person and how you are as a potential coworker, I don't really know how much value it'll serve you. You can try to get a letter from every away rotation, that'd be great. But the last one that you can really get a letter from and put it into your app is essentially September. So this past year, I think the way we did it was you could either rotate at home July or August. So if you rotate in July, you can do an away rotation in August and September. So you can get 2 from away rotations. Or 1 if you do well, it's still 2 if you do an away rotation prior to your home rotation. Some people said to try and get a letter from a non-ortho surgeon. I don't think it's mandatory, but some programs apparently asked. I didn't come across any programs that specifically asked that, but there might be some out there who do want that. So that's something also to keep in mind. Application process, it's never too early to start your personal statement, start updating your CV. And also, if you have an idea of the programs that you want to apply to, take a look at their websites, because they usually say their specific requirements. So the max number of letters they want, if they want their letters addressed to their program director specifically. This year, there was a couple programs like asked for you to record yourself answering some sort of question. So that's something worth being aware of as you approach the application cycle. The interview process, practice. It's really hard to anticipate what they're going to ask you, but you can bet that almost every program will ask you those questions right there. Tell me about yourself. Why us? Why ortho? And the killer, what questions do you have for us? But it's, of course, just every program's best way to actually get an idea of like who you are as a person. So it's reasonable to expect them to ask you. Ortho interviews, I think, are relatively short compared to other subspecialties. So they can range, in my experience, they range anywhere from 8 minutes per room to, I think, 20 or 25 minutes per room. But 8 minutes is definitely short. So be cognizant of how long you're talking for. Hopefully I'm not talking for too long right now, but that's definitely something that you'll get through practice. So post-interview communication, everybody really likes talking about that. That's basically after you do your interview. If you reach out to the program, or if the program reaches out to you, that's just all post-interview communication means. It can be all sorts of things. Yeah. Yeah, so the question was, we can address that in the panel. The question was, are programs starting to move back towards in-person interviews? In my experience, I was all virtual except for New York, most of my New York programs. I think they're, realizing they can interview more students and it's just cheaper for students to do Zoom. So I thought I had heard that it might actually stay Zoom oriented for a little bit longer than we might have anticipated, especially with things like bouncing back to somewhat of normalcy with COVID. But we can talk about it in the panel. Letters of interest, that's a form of post-interview communication. Sometimes students will tell a program, you're like, hey, you're the one for me. I just want you to know that. Whether you want to do that is, of course, entirely up to you. So next is the panel. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time, but I think it's just good to be aware of some of that national data and the data from this year's applying class. Thank you guys for listening. Of course, we're happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm wondering if the number in the presentation was mean or like a medium, because it is a small sample size. So I just want to know whether or not it's the number that is whether it's a mean or medium, not excluded in positive or negative way.
Can you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, so the number of sample size of the MS4 is kind of small. So I'm wondering the number was a mean or medium. Mean can be positively skewed or negatively skewed, depending on, a small sample size.
So I think there was a question, the sample size of M4 was kind of small. So was it a mean or median? Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
It was mean.
It was a medium. Thank you. That's very helpful.
All right, so the last part of that presentation covered a lot of the actual questions that we got sent in. So I guess we can start with some general questions. Could you talk a little bit about the general interview process? Yeah, just
I feel like when I was applying or when I was like in the shoot, I only had one. They also had to stay through. But I don't know if it's maybe multi-factor, but I don't know, maybe moving away from that. So I wouldn't stress as much about that. But I think they're generally like they just, for the most part, they just try to get to know you. Most of my people so they're not these really long interviews. You're gonna ask you a couple standard questions that goes up there. You'll probably get some follow-up questions later in the interview, but a lot of it is going to be pretty distracting.
Yeah, I would agree. I only had one acknowledgement on all of my combined. You definitely will get asked some bigger questions, but be prepared to, think on the fly, because you're going to be asked questions that you're definitely not going to be able to prepare for.
Yeah, I agree. I think mostly they're trying to gauge whether you will fit in their class or not. You will hear that a lot, even when you're on your ways. It's a big deal for them to take someone in who they don't fit their sport and code personality test. It becomes really challenging for them. So 8 minutes is short, but that's the amount of time you have to kind of come across as someone who they think will fit in their class. It's hard, but the questions they'll ask you will be, tell me more about this. That's basically your elevator pitch to get across to them saying why you want to do something. And they will throw a few curveballs. I got a curveball asking about, if I wrote a book about you, what would you like with that? Silly things like that. But they're not asking they're asking for things that if you have an answer, why? And they'll probe you on it and say, oh, why? So be ready for those kinds of things.
The general setup of most interviews it's a lot of attending, and there'll be one chief room with the chief resident of the program. Those are usually the more laid back rooms. They're just asking you fun questions, more getting to know you as a person. The attending group they'll be divvied up with research and kind of operative experience and research and different things, basically different kind of aspects context of your application that they'll ask you. And sometimes they might just ask you one question that they ask every candidate, and then they'll ask you a little bit about your hobbies or things personal to you. But they ask that standard questions, and if they can have something that everyone on people. But I think that's how most of the setup for me.
Yeah, the interview process for them is also painful. I mean, think about the amount of students that they have to interview. They want to have fun too, so they're not going to want to ask the standardized questions a lot of time. They want to talk to you about things that you're excited about. So if you have something that's cool sticks out on your application, like they'll probably ask you about that, and that very well may take up the whole 8-12 minute conversation. That's not, if that's the case, that's okay. But you just want to, be engaged and have a conversation.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions yourself. They always want to it's very conversational, that they're looking at your application, be like, hey, tell us about this. You'll get some of the generic questions like tell like an experience with leadership or something like that, or at a moment of adversity, you've had to overcome it. But the two most things for me for the interview season, one, scheduling them, just because you're like hoping they don't overlap you and you don't convert it in an interview. But that ends up working itself out. And then if there's like a minute left, they ask if you have any questions. Just like have a couple questions ready to roll. Even if it's the same question, it's not like people in the room are saying, hey, it's the same question. Like one of my go-tos is always just like, yeah, I just like find out whatever specialty they were in or how long they've been there. Like, why are you at this program? Why did you choose this? What do you look pride in this program? What are you looking for in an applicant? And then especially like what are you looking for in an applicant? Then you can kind of, tailor your answers to what they're looking for. Which is kind of nice. But it ends up being like pretty fun too. The interview season, I don't know about for you guys, was kind of a little less stressful than I expected. You get into a group. If you have a number of interviews, like my third one, you're seeing the same things over again. You start to feel you're hitting the same beats and you're on good cadence, and you got them, you're engaged well. And you start to find out also what each flavor of orthopedic surgery is at each program. So each program is going to be a little bit different. Each program is going to have like a different focus. So you can find out what kind of fits what you're doing. So it's definitely a two-way street. It's pretty cool.
Another point on the general structure for like the kinds of questions that you guys will get asked. I don't know if Robert still does it, but when we applied, at least, it was the mini medical interviews, and it's a lot of like ethical situations and like Casper, that was the name of it, but that like practice testing. But I would say most programs had at least some sort of ethical question, like what would you do? One of the ones I remember is like, what would you do if you like an ethical question within your team? So if you saw like your team, your teammate was like lying about something or presented something that they didn't actually, find on this exam, like what do you do? So that's something to keep in mind. Great practice for Robert Wood gave great practice for that, in my opinion.
Thank you. Could you guys just use the mic so that our friends on Zoom can hear?
We have a couple questions in the chat. The first one is, can you guys give insights into some of the memorable skills during the interview process? Like any ones that stood out to you or ones that are very unique?
I don't know.
Are you allowed to do that?
I didn't have any, so. I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to.
All I'll say is for the skills group, it's not how you do it in the skills group. It's more how can you handle like the stress of it. And so like a lot of them will be asking you questions while you're doing a task, and it might be like an impossible task. Not that I didn't have this one, but I had heard that, you have to suture together 2 pieces of American cheese and practice it for just in case. And it was impossible. I could not do it at all. And but then what I read or heard or whatever was that, you keep trying to do it while they're asking you questions, and it's more how can you just keep trying, and can you just stay calm under pressure? So I think that's what they're looking for. They're not saying, oh, this person suture did this better than this person. That's not.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Have nobody asked you guys to make tie or do a tie while you're doing the interview the entire time, anything sort of just weird stuff that stands out, I guess?
I think it's a extension of the same question.
I just want to
Yeah.
know, I'm a MS3, rising MS4, so I just want to get some insight.
Yeah. So he wants to know, okay, just to make sure, like timing of your tying or anything.
Like last year, like during the virtual, like from like the upperclassmen, they mentioned something along that when they're doing interview, some program asked them to like do their tie the entire time while they're doing the interview, like stuff like that. Does that is this clear? I'm just wondering. Like they were tying tie, they were doing their tie. They asked them to do their tie while the entire interview process was going on.
So he's saying, somebody from last year mentioned, one of their programs had them like tie a tie.
Yeah.
And I think he just wants to know, I guess, how common it is that you're asked to do that kind of skill in a skills room. Was that about it?
It's not always a skill room, but sometimes they'll ask you to teach them something. That you have. It could be anything. It could be like how to catch a wave, body surgery. And you should describe it. You know, or it's how to cook an omelet. You know, you can literally. I think I've read somewhere, heard somewhere that it was like try not to be sciencey, kind of like look into your hobbies maybe a little bit, you know, and kind of like describe something that you just have passion for. They want to know that you can do things in a systematic way. You can follow steps, and that, you know, in a residency, there's a lot of top-down teaching from the junior to the interns, from seniors to juniors, and they want to know that you can speak the language and kind of like clearly help people out, because it's all tribal knowledge. A lot of this stuff in residency is just the guy above you or girl above you teaching the person teaching you, and you're going to teach the next person. So like that's kind of the skill room that they're looking for. Are they going to know that you get it, like, fixate something and hold it there while they put a blade on completely perfectly and it close up in 15 minutes? They're not going to figure that out in their field. They're more looking for your mindset and kind of like how you think about things.
Yeah, I've had PDs who point blank said, I don't care if you can do a single skill as long as you're teachable. That's all I care about. And that's point blank from the PD of my program who said, I don't care how much art we know. And we honestly care. And those were his words that he meant it.
Thank you. The next question is, can you speak a little bit about the AOA process? If you guys could talk a little bit about the AOA process.
So for AOA, there's two different categories of AOA that you can apply to: the junior AOA and senior AOA. And I believe junior AOA invitations are sent out in April, or around April, and then they usually take, I want to say, about 10% of the total classes. I think up to 10% of the class can be inducted into junior AOA. Invitations for senior AOA will then go out in August timeframe, so just before applications are sent out. At that point, they can induct another 10% of the class, so up to 1% of the class total. I believe is the rule that you conduct the AOA. The AOA application, pretty much junior and senior both with the exact same application, and it'll ask you to pretty much, I think, talk about meaningful experience that you have with research or service, and talk about how this experience had impact on Rutgers or the community. There's whatever impact it had on the community.
Could you guys sort of all talk about your time as a way rotator, what you did good, you saw others do not as good, what you wish you didn't?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So I rotated by choice mostly with local programs. But what I realized when I rotated on the treatment places I went to was they were very, 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 and that's what you'll notice. And I hear this one saying that each program you go to has its philosophy, its final knowledge, and everything else that comes with it. And extremely, there's no one program is things. And it's good because we had 3 rotations and you can see exactly how they operate, how they treat the residents from the strengths are, what the weaknesses are, and you evaluate the benefit and then come back. So the places I went to were, obviously, I went to RWJMS, I went to St. Luke's, and I went to St. Joseph's in Paris. I had a personal connection at St. Joseph's, and I knew that if I went there, I would experience. Well, to me, when I was at NJMS, it was a bigger pool of people. There were more other students who came from other schools, so you would be compared with against them while you're doing your rotations. And what mattered in all these places was they really didn't care about what you were doing well, whether you're suturing, doing all this. They really cared about whether you were present, whether you had attitude, whether you were always willing to pick up anything they asked you to do, and how well you got along with it. The negative signs for them was doing things that were odd or eccentric sometimes. And I had a student who was sitting on the floor a few times and it bothered residents. Now, I didn't see it as a big negative flag to me, but later on, one of the chiefs said, "Who's that person in your class who's rotating right now who always sits on the floor?" I don't know. I don't know anything about it, but I clearly knew that was a big deal for them, bothering them. Because clearly, before I've been pending Washington 15 years, you do not want to sit there. So things like that, trip them up and they say, "We really want this person in our class." I did have an experience where I did not know this. I just walked out of I was walking out of the building one day, and this guy who I knew was in the department. I didn't know who he was. I'd seen him in the morning report a couple times. Didn't know who he was, but he asked me, "Hey, can you help me put this patient in the van?" Very difficult. It was a huge, 400-pound patient. I literally was coming off of my call, was going home. I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll help you." We spent probably about 40 minutes trying to get this patient into the van. Right? And there was another student with me who, about 20-minute mark, failed. He was like, "Oh, I got something else to do," and he failed. Later on, I found out that this guy was the PA for one of the ortho attendings there, who has known him for 20 years and really cares about what he thinks. So these matter. You're being watched. Every second you're being watched. What you do, what you don't do, is also someone's talking about you and saying, "Oh, he helped me do this." Would have done anyways. Didn't matter, right? But if you do it, someone knows. It matters. So I'd say just be yourself and don't do weird things.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly right. You want to show interest and be looking for this person, but also don't be annoying or too eager. So it's a good balance. For example, if you're in the OR, you know, and attending an intern, you don't want to be the somebody that's elbowing and out of the way to try and show off and look good. Because it's a team, they're all going to talk. So little things like that where you might think that you're trying to be eager, really trying to make it light on people. Or trying to be too eager to show that you have certain knowledge of ways to have actually things like that can be an issue. So it is kind of hard to try and find that balance, but it really is mostly about personality and trying to show their culture.
I think one of the most important things is to keep in mind, yes, you're being evaluated, of course, but just keep in mind you're part of the team. They're trying to see how you're functioning. Are they going to enjoy working with you for 5 years? And part of that is, showing you don't think you're too good to do something. You're a medical student. You're there to provide for the team, however that is possible. However they're asking you to help the team out, you are, like Matt said, you are the yes person. You do anything, and you should do a lot of things without having to be told. Whether that's through anticipating things or just helping the team out. If it's picking something up off the ground, you have to show that you're not just showing what you know. You are trying, whether that's helping cases get done earlier so that your residents can sign out and the attendings can go home earlier. If you're able to do that, help out the team and make people's lives easier, it's going to be noticed. Like Karen said, you're always being evaluated.
not always in a bad way, like if you do something wrong, but if you're doing something great and you're really helping out the team all the time and, never exhausted and never, too tired to do something, go to the patient, bring them to the OR or, bring them to PACU after the case, it'll be noticed. Like you're not, again, the other thing is you're not only there to improve yourself to residents and attendings. Like, don't think you're too good, to help out nurses. Don't think you're too good to help out your PAs or APMs. Like everyone is evaluating you. They've known some of these attendings that you think you're trying to impress longer than you've been alive. So yeah, you've been attending for 20 years. So a lot of times people evaluating you trust some of these individuals a lot more than you appreciate. And they're part of the team just as much as you are. So make sure you're helping your team out. I think that's my piece of advice.
Yeah, I think, and it's kind of been said that we want to make everyone look good. So one piece of advice I got was, unless you are asked a question, don't answer. If you're asking a resident, don't be like, oh, I know the answer and say it, because then it's going to be that's going to shine a negative light on you. If you're asking the resident, especially if the resident that I don't know, then especially then don't say it unless it's okay, Niche, what do you think it is? Because again, you're looking at one off the resident. So things like that. One thing that I think I tried to do at every away rotation was keep it 100%. So if there's some optional clinic for residents, I would go to that every single day or as many days as I could. And I basically didn't want to have any residents like, oh, maybe I could have gotten somewhere if I had done this. I didn't want to have to say that. So I did everything I could and then I didn't want to whatever. Put in my forward and well, it didn't work out. I didn't want to have any regrets. One thing maybe I wish I had done better. I heard during some interviews like, oh, a lot of the residents that spoke really highly of you. And, I think I got along with the residents pretty well. I think I could have made a better effort to maybe have the attendings on my name, maybe talk to them a little bit more. And that's tough. They're not going to know you, and especially on like certain services and depending on the attending, you might not get along with them. But I tried to get along with the residents and maybe could have done better at getting along.
One more thing I just wanted to say for our class, I think as a whole, most of the students read away rotations generally. And when I know you guys come up, some of you guys are preparing to do also full away rotations plus stuff. Just be prepared. It's a full time and you're going to do it. I had away rotation where I was showing up at 3:45 in the morning, leaving 8 p.m. almost every day. So it's a stretch. Just be prepared. Don't by the time you're on your fourth vacation, be just as excited for it.
Yeah, and just kind of back up what these guys said already, didn't hit a lot of points of just like making analyze, being available, being nice, like good to work with. So basically also it's like they expect a little bit more of you too in your later rotations, because they know that you've had rotations. It's kind of ridiculous, but like I looked at it as like you're on like a like a montage, just like leveling up each away rotation. Like in the beginning, they have like no expectations. So start to do simple things. You don't have any skills too. You have to be real with yourself. Like, what do you know what to do? Like you don't know anything. You might know the anatomy. So do what you can do. Pick up trash. Get the patient. But do pick up skills. Don't just expect to stay at that level the entire time. Find a resident. Sometimes you can't because it just is what it is, but start taking notes on what they're getting for each operation, especially in trauma. There's a lot of opportunity for like setting up the patient. And certain other specialties, it's like a lot of PAs and like secondary help with knock things out quickly just because it's well with machine. With trauma, you're gonna have opportunities in other places too. But find out how to set up patients, find out what they need. So when they turn around and need it, it's right there. And they might not see you do it, but someone does. And especially the people like the the scrub techs and everything, that people that are setting up the OR, you're in there like helping them drive the OR from the OR as they got the trash, like little stuff like that. Oh, this guy's around, he's helping us out, making our life easier. They talk, and then they're actually gonna look to help you in the OR. They're gonna like not be a pain in the butt like when you're scrubbing in. They'll ask you questions. They'll give you like little things to talk about. You start to the shit a little bit with them. It becomes more fun. I will say that the worst part about the way rotations was that you earn someone's trust, like you earn the OR's trust every 4 weeks, and then you gotta restart. And it's like, it's hard, it's like the worst, you got the Hawkeyes on you again day one, you have to get used to that a little bit too. But like I said, if you show up and you know what you're doing, and on those second and third rotations, don't automatically start doing what you're doing at the end of that previous rotation. You need to earn their trust as well. Each menu is another area where you gotta kind of start at like square one. And yeah, it's a little easier because now you don't have to like, just find things to do, you know what to do. But don't just act like, don't think they're gonna, they expect you to do that. Show that you can do the easy stuff, work your way up. And don't like tell residents, oh, like, I've reamed a master tabulum before, like, let me try. Like, they'll be like, okay, I've never seen you do this. Like, I don't even trust you to suture. Like, you don't even know how to set up a patient. Like, setting up a patient is something that I hadn't like profound. I didn't understand the impact of it, even in like my 30-day surgery rotation, still my away rotations. Like that patient is the attending patient as soon as they come through that door. And when you put them under anesthesia, you're responsible for them, how their body has pressure points, that how much of the field is covered when you prep the patient and drape them. So like being able to learn those intricacies of how they do that and show a lot of maturation as these medical students. A lot of medical students don't realize how important that part of the surgery is. Everyone always thinks about knife to knife, like skin to skin. But prior prep, we need to show an appreciation to that and intricacies and why they do things. Everything in the OR has a reason. And if you can start to show you understand those reasons, it goes on.
I think that's a great point, which is sometimes positioning the patient is a gating factor. There's several times, especially on the patients tend to be a little bigger, the beds, there's a lot of thought process that has to go into this. And even if it's not your room, if you know that someone needs help in another room, you going and offering that help, they actually appreciate it. Especially when they're like struggling, they say, hey, can I help? You just walk in and say, hey, I'm in another room, but I saw you guys, can I help? And some of these patients, it takes a lot, like 6 people sometimes I've had in situations where we had to position the patient for a spine surgery. So you help out a little bit.
Kind of on that same note, how did you go about obtaining letters of rec from aways? And here, did you just wait until the end, or did you bring it up kind of early so they can pay more attention to how you carry yourself and have something to write about?
So one of the things on the slideshow I wrote was to identify potential writers early on. Of course, it just helps you out. You get to know the attending. The attending gets to know you for a longer period of time, and you're a little bit more comfortable asking them for a letter later on. It's different at every program, but some programs where you do away rotations, you have like a designated mentor. So a surgeon you might operate with anytime they're in the OR, you'll go to the clinic with them anytime they're in the clinic. So that's actually a really nice thing, in my opinion, because then it just kind of, it's like a match like relationship early on, and it's something you'll have for all 4 weeks that you're there. So that's one thing to be aware of. But if that's not the case, and you're not told that you have a mentor, one individual, it's a good idea to try and get an idea of who potential writers would be as early as possible, whether it's by hearing from residents, past rotators like one like us,
I'm just going to say, kind of to the point when you talked about getting a letter, it doesn't unlock the region unless you get a letter from there. I think that's probably for me. One of my ways was Northwestern in Chicago, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll open up the Midwest. I did that one in October, November. It was like I asked them to you asked me to do and everything to do, and I didn't think about that when I was applying for the away. And so when everything came through, like when all the interviews came out, I was like, oh, Northwestern from Chicago, West, like anything else, because one new identity. If you want to unlock a region, which I don't even know if that's true or not, they might be going away from that as a geographic preference, supplemental now. But if you want to unlock something in that way, do it earlier.
You guys put the question, where else have you applied to? Yeah, where else have you applied to? I know they're not supposed to ask, but I got to ask you every So that's kind of the geographical thing I said, like I use the divide advantage saying, this is where I'm applying. And can be, for example, if Northwestern comes and says, this is my region.
Also, just to give a specific example, so when I had a 4-week away rotation, I think I usually asked to leave me the 3rd week for the letter, and when I had a 2-week, when it was like broken up into 2 weeks, over the 4 weeks, I asked.
Another good resource for letters too is like if you do have like someone a resident that you can talk to about certain things, about how that you've been hanging out with for a while, they give you like insight on who the person is to ask. They know who the letter writers are. They've had people apply for fellowship and going through the process of asking the same attendees for letters. And they'll also know how approachable some of the attendees are for letters. Go ahead, they're never going to get back to you, or this person writes great letters, even though you spent 2 days with them. I'll make sure, then they might be like, you know what, if we're trying to get you a letter from this person, we're gonna make sure you're working with them next week. So then like, so being able to have like that resident resource is nice too.
Also, every program you rotate, you almost always will work with either the chair or the PD or the APDs. If not, then you need to see how you can work with them. They are the ones who are going to make the decisions at the end of the day. So you need to know that they know your name, that you're either work with them somehow. Like, I think in places where you don't get a letter, you have to make sure that those people somehow.
All right, thank you. Now we're going to open it up to anyone who'd like to ask questions in the audience. So just raise your hand or shout about.
When you were picking places to do full rotations for this program to apply to, what is sort of the best way that you have of trying to suss out what the culture or style is?
I think for me, I looked at where we match people in the past, and that's kind of how I selected probably were there. And at that point, I just reached out to them if they're out of there.
Yeah, I think something you can look at is like how research oriented the program is versus how clinically oriented they are. And I think that big programs oftentimes can have a lot of similarities in terms of like the really clinical ones that don't really do as much research on the research heavy. So if you're thinking about doing away with it, if you know what program you want to be at, then that makes it a lot easier. If you don't know what you want to be at, then you can pick different types of programs so you kind of get a good exposure to those the 3-way rotations, and then that'll help you make decisions later on. And yeah, exactly like you said, if you know someone or you know someone who knows someone at a program, definitely reach out to them. They'll help you to have an advocate.
Kind of on that same line, like the clinical versus research. Also, the program is like level 1 trauma center, where it's a lot of trauma. Just like certain programs that were like trauma focused are going to be different from even your heavily academic that do a lot of sports or joints, or your community hospitals that do a lot of joints and spine. Calls will be different, scholars will be different, cultures could be different. That's another conversation. It's also like different subspecialties you get experience, but it's just like okay.
Well, one kind of thing that I wanted to bring up, and it's not really helpful for those that are current 30 years, but those that are first and second years. I'm not sure if you've gone through your 3rd-year schedule yet, but you have the opportunity to do orthopedic rotations here at Robert. There's also that rotation over at Mom that you can do. And if you're able to get that during the 3rd year, it's almost like a 3-year rotation. Mom is 7. So if you can schedule that during the 3rd year, it's kind of like getting an extra rotation for you.
We used to get a 2-week, and then I remember at the end of our 3rd year, they had expanded it. You could do a full 4-week there if you wanted to.
Sorry, going back to the letter thing, I think, Ryan, you mentioned you were going to touch on like your approach when you were asking different attendings for whether you're just the narrative letter versus asking for both the SLOR. So like anyone can speak on that.
Yeah, so the SLOR is required by a few programs out there for all of your letter writers. They might have actually only wanted the SLOR, and not even wanted a narrative. letter. But in my opinion, I think it might be in your, like, if I could go back and do it again. I did, so what I ended up doing was basically asked for, prior to knowing in my earlier rotations, I asked for a letter of recommendation. Without specifying, so basically a narrative letter. And then after I realized, one of the programs I was really interested in required ESLOR letters, I then went like emailed the attending, a month later and asked them, I was like, oh, by the way, would you mind also doing an ESLOR for me? And luckily they were, just do it. So very much appreciated. So if I was in your guys' shoes, I would just ask everyone that you're asking for a letter for to do both. And then you can just send, send whichever one's needed by the program.
Follow-up question, is there any strat, like, with this going back to the numbers, people were getting like 2 away letters and then sometimes like 2 or 3 from home program. So is there a strategy that you recommend of like how to assign different letters to different programs? Is there any advice you were given on that?
So, because I also did a research year, I had an extra letter. So I think I had 5 letters. Most programs will either say 3. Most programs will be 3 or 4 letters max. And I would suggest, if you know for a fact, you waive. I would suggest waiving your ability to see the letter, because then, if a program sees like, oh, well, he didn't waive it, he knows they know that you screened it out or something. So you waive it, but if you have a good inclination of if an attending wrote you a particularly strong letter, I would probably just use it at every program. And then if you have a surplus of letters like I did, I basically, and if I wasn't totally confident how strong it was, I would use that letter at programs they either did residency at, did fellowship at, had previously worked at. You want to definitely make sure you send that letter to those programs. But I think you usually have an idea, like what I was saying before. You want to ask attendings that really know you and can speak to your character. And I think if you're kind of staying true to that for the most part, you'll have a pretty good idea of whether they're going to be able to write you a strong letter or not.
More ways did you apply to one time period per program? Like, let's say Barkwood, July to August, or did you apply for multiple time periods per program?
Yeah, you'll realize that it's really frustrating because most of the aways are on VSATs. There are a couple that are not. So you have to kind of keep your schedule open for the time frame, and you have to apply. I think February, March, somewhere around that time frame. Right now, yeah. So, and then you won't find out for a while. You may find out very quickly, or it may take about a month. I don't know how long it was. Some programs, so you kind of have to apply for. Say you pick a block. Say you say I want to do RWJMS first. I want to do it in July. Keep in mind you have to do your step 2 at some point as well. So you have to build that into your schedule. Then you keep 3 blocks open and you apply at different places. You get what you get and you try to fill that spot up. You may not get the one you want to fill that spot. If you get something to fill that spot, that's great. And others will tell you how they went about doing it. I picked one that was not on VSATs. So I knew exactly when it was going to go. And then I had to fill 2 other spots. So I applied 3 places and I got 2. I heard back from 2 places. And so there's some leeway they'll let you move things around. Once they accept you, you can ask them, hey, can I move it? Like, is it okay if I do it instead of the time frame you gave me? Is it possible for me to move like by 1 week? Some programs be flexible. NJMS, they only give you 2 blocks. Very annoying. They do it in the middle of the month, which is completely annoying because it doesn't align with our scheduling at all. That's the way they are. They only give you 2 blocks and you have to pick them. Yeah. So each program is very different. So you kind of go through and say, what can I live with my schedule? You may not get what you want, but at least you'll get something.
Also, if you do accept it for a certain time block at one institution, then you also want to go in and draw that application. They
how many, because it's like I heard from certain mentors that only apply for 3, you want to do 3, for the same reason you mentioned. And I know someone who applied to multiple, like 6 or 7, and he told me he didn't get an interviews places that he denied.
I mean, I think it probably will probably hear the six, depending on who you ask. I won't be applying to one program for each block, and probably will recommend applying to 2 programs for each block. But I think you'll hear many different. But doing things, if you want to, if you have to get multiple offers, like withdrawing immediately, I think from what I've heard, it's not what that is.
Yeah, and when I say withdraw, I don't mean withdraw your application entirely. You may still have applicants in for different time blocks at institution, just only withdraw the time slot that you accept someone.
Just a question in terms of financing the application, how do you guys plan that out? How much it cost? You can generally give how much it was.
So you have to look at the application itself as well as. The application itself isn't that bad. In fact, you don't know, it's really like $50 and $30, like for the program. Yes. It wasn't much for product. For VHLO, I think it was like maybe $30 to $50. But I think I applied for 4 verifications. 30. But then you do everything. Very big. Some of them really expensive. A lot of the other ones. So applications, I'd say you're looking at $50 up to $3 to $4, the maximum for the application. So then the expenses. Yeah, so the application, I mean, these particularly, I applied to 60 programs, and I think I paid about 100 programs. Yeah, that's a great security.
You can try to work with someone, the practice earlier, so when I did in New York, in Chicago, I stayed with a friend, so say,
for those that did a research year, what were certain criteria that you guys look forward to where to spend that year, and were there, like, when you guys went there, did you guys latch on to like one attending, or did you guys work with a bunch?
Yeah, so I think it kind of comes down to your personal goals a little bit. So each research year is going to be very different in terms of what your responsibilities are, what the research to clinical come is, even like the hours per week. I mean, there's a wide range. People work 20 hours a week, like 4 days a week, half days, up to like 8 hours. It really depends. So I think give like an example. So my research position, it was a lot of the responsibilities of the research coordinator. So like, I helped manage, it was like over 15 randomized controlled trials. That was a lot of my day. And then kind of on the side, I had to find time for small perspective studies. My position, it was run by 2 attendings. I wound up working with those 2 attendings almost like exclusively. Maybe another attending. But you'll kind of see, I mean, you can talk about your research experience too, but it kind of just depends on what the program outlines. If your goal is to like output as much research as possible, then you would probably look for a program that gives you a lot of autonomy in terms of what you can do, less like randomized controlled trials or things like that. If your goal is that you want to understand the side of research, then you want to try to. So it kind of comes down with your personal goal.
May I speak directly like into the mic for the Zoom people? Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree with Matt. The way I heard about the program, so I was in signing for my research year. I heard about, I didn't hear about the program because it's not a set position. So if you look on Orthopaedic, this is how it was a couple of years ago, a lot of programs that have formal positions will put it on Orthopaedic and will give you the instructions for the actual application process. Otherwise, in my case, I was able, one of the PIs outside actually made a position for me. And I only got a position or had the idea to reach out to this PI because one of the her EGY2s when she was a fourth year and had matched at something. He put after and said, "Is there anybody that's not maybe interested in having a student for research?" She said yes, and we put me in contact, and it all worked out. So basically, you have two options. You have the programs that do have set positions, and there's also ways to find positions for yourself, which I'm fortunate enough to have worked out for me. And with regards to your question about one attending, multiple, I would definitely suggest your position might be with one attending, but I would ask the attending, see if they're willing or okay with having you reach out to other attendings and helping out getting your hands in different projects. One's good experience, two is a great way to meet people, and show your reliability. So yeah, also, so I did have basic clients, so like lab stuff and half clinical research. And I was able, my basic clients was with my main PI, and then the clinical research was with several spine attendings. Another thing that anybody's interested in doing or considering doing research here is to keep in mind, yes, like your purpose for the year is to get research done and see if research is something you want to have in your career as a future surgeon. But also like make sure, I think it's really valuable. I think we talked about it. It's really a good idea to get as much actual clinic experience as time allows. So I think second semester of my research year, I went to the OR once every week, helped out the residents as much as I could, and got to watch one of the attending surgeons basically operate once a week. Great way to learn stuff and great way to meet people. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a good way to just take advantage of being in a program. And also it's great to see if you like it and then you apply for a rotation. There's a good chance we'll have your rotation to just have to do that.
How did you decide that a research year was one right for you, but also like that you needed one for your application first? How do you gauge that?
Another good question, and I also think that's a very personal question too, and kind of again, just what your goals are. So I think for the most part, so the first thing you want to have a conversation with some mentor that you trust. If there's someone here around that you trust about your application. If they say that like maybe you're a little bit worried about the application and they think the research will help, I think that'll help you. If they think that you have a competitive application, then I don't think anyone necessarily has to do a research year unless they want to. So like for me, I wanted to just gain some more experience with research and get more comfortable with the research process. So that's why I took the research year. I think there definitely are costs. I mean, there's a cost, not every program pays, and the ones that do, typically they're not paid that well. So like you might have to take out another loan for that year. Even if you don't, you're essentially losing like a year of your top earning potential taking the research year. So there are like real costs to doing it. So you have to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. I think to want to gain more research experience, I thought that was a valid reason. Maybe like if you want to be a really research heavy academic program and you want to increase your chances for that, and that might also be a valuable reason to do it as well. I don't think anyone necessarily has to do it unless, again, maybe you had a conversation that kind of steers you in that path. Otherwise, I think it's pretty personal.
Yeah, just to kind of mirror what Matt said, personal question, it's tough to do as a medical student, but it's, it's worthwhile considering the kind of career you would imagine for yourself, whether you want to be a community surgeon who operates a ton and doesn't really focus on research too much, or if you want to be an academic surgeon who works at a big major academic institutions operating and conducting research. My personal experience, I didn't have much orthopedic research going into third year, because I had always imagined being the kind of community surgeon who didn't pay attention to research too much and just operated as much as possible, because I loved shadowing in the operating room. And I don't know if Dr. Todd is on this call, but I got involved in a project with him, absolutely loved the process, and it's like, oh, maybe, my career, I love a career in academic surgery, and I figured maybe if I wanted to consider some of those large major academic institutions for residency, it would be in my best interest to get some more academic research, because of course, residency is not the time to learn how to conduct research. It's really tough if you're learning how to be a surgeon. You're not going to have a lot of time on your hands. So if you don't have that knowledge, and the research here is a great time to afford you that knowledge.
Actually, I'll also add too, so, it's not, I think a researcher used to be maybe about 3 years ago, almost kind of guaranteed a match. I don't think he does anymore. So, again, it's like not something to take lightly, because essentially like your letter of recommendation from your researcher mentor should be like one of the best letters of recommendation that any admissions committee sees out again. You just spend a year with this person, versus some people that might spend 2 weeks or even 4 weeks with a surgeon on a rotation. So you have to do a really good job. If you don't do a really good job and you have kind of subpar letter, I think that's issues in the too. So just some things to consider. I don't think it's the MOP all anymore. And more people are taking research here. So just kind of consider your overall.
For recommendation letters, is it okay to have like a research heavy letter? Or that's a
Yes, so I had, my PI was a PhD, and he wrote me one of my letters. I didn't send it to every program, of course I sent it to outside. I definitely didn't send it to every program. Like someone had mentioned, there might be some programs that request non-orthopedic surgeons, so it's the perfect time to use that letter. But I didn't personally encounter that. But you do definitely have to strategize where you use those letters, because there are definitely some programs that I always came across that said only orthopedic surgeons for, and yeah, that was about it. But you can definitely use, especially if you spend most of the time with a non-MD or non-orthopedic surgeon and it's a strong letter, do not be afraid to use it as long as, it says we only want orthopedic surgeon letters.
I'm not gonna lie to that for the east floor, if you're gonna request that, you can do. They have a section on research and then a section on clinical and experience with the person. And so I think you usually want the person to be able to speak to both aspects of that. So one person that I did research with at the University of Maryland, I tried to do 2 weeks of my rotation with him, so I had that clinical part of that too. So I think that's important to consider.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Last.
So when you guys talk about unlocking like geographic locations, like how broad or narrow is that? Like, is that just in any kind of quadrant that kind of counts, or is it more of like we're limited state by state kind of scope?
At least for me, I mean, I think it's not even a real thing. It's like, actually, I think it's more students, but it's probably more like a region. I don't think it's just a state, or at least in my thought when I was going to the okay, things in the Midwest or like more Midwest area. I was hoping that people would say, okay, I see that I'm willing to move somewhere farther from the east or the That's what I want to try to show that. But that's what I'm thinking. For the geographic preferences, there's also very specific regions, which some states fall under. They're very, some might be 3 states wide or, very few states wide. I don't think unlocking would go along those lines, but I think it's region based.
I'll add to that. I think one thing you have to have a good story as to why you want to go to a certain place. There are some places you specifically ask why you want to come here, and you don't want to give away a spot to someone who may not eventually come here just because you want to come and say, "Oh, I love California." It's not good. You have to have a valid argument for them. To say either home, same as medical school, what you did, why are you from, what height do you have? Same thing, a little bit more amped up. They really want to see like why you really want to be there. And if you pass the bar, they'll give you the spot. Doing a way or the interview spot. Once you get in a way, usually the interview spot. Where you have to have some element of valid, I'd say a valid argument.
And also, if anybody has particular questions about specific away locations, I'm happy to talk about the places I would do, or that all of us up here are. Just for transparency, I did mine at George, Miami, shared with you. That's all too about their experiences. So if anybody wants to talk afterwards, reach out to me. That's happy to answer questions.
And I was at NYU, Mount Sinai, Montpelier.
I did Rush, NYU, and Mayo.
I did mine at Cooper down in Camden, Memorial down in Baltimore, State.
I think I mentioned before, I did mine at NJMS, University Hospital, Newark, then one at St. Joe's, Patterson, and the other one was St. Luke's and Bethel.
Great. So let's give a round of applause for our panelists. We're going to put up the attendance sheet, so just stick around for a little bit. We're also going to send out the presentation as well as contact information. If you guys have any other questions, specific questions that you'd like to ask our panelists about. So thank you again for coming, and hang tight for just a sec.